It all started as just another busy morning at the airport. People rushing through terminals, flight announcements echoing, and everyone just trying to get where they're going. Among the crowd was a well-dressed black woman, calm and composed, heading to her gate like anyone else. But things took a turn when a police officer, without any real reason, stopped her. His tone, sharp. His words, disrespectful. Right there, in front of everyone, he made assumptions and treated her like she didn't belong. The woman tried to stay calm, politely asking what the issue was, but the officer kept pushing, louder, ruder, and more dismissive with each passing second. Other travelers began to slow down, watching the tension unfold. What he didn't know, though, was that this woman wasn't just anyone. She was connected in a way he never expected. With one quick call, she calmly said, "Hi, babe. I'm having a bit of an issue at the gate. Can you help?" What followed left the officer speechless. He had no clue that the man on the other end of the call wasn't just her husband. He was the owner of the very airline operating that terminal. And what happened next? Let's just say this officer learned a powerful lesson about assumptions, respect, and the quiet strength of the woman he underestimated. The officer, still unaware of who he was talking to, continued acting like he was in charge. He questioned her, interrupted her every time she tried to speak, and even called for backup, making it seem like she was causing trouble when all she wanted was to board her flight. The woman stayed composed, refusing to match his energy. But under that calm surface, you could tell she wasn't going to let this slide. As she waited, still holding her phone, a few passengers nearby started filming. Whispers spread. "Why is she being treated like this?" one person asked. "She didn't do anything," said another. The woman looked around, clearly used to moments like this, but tired of them too. She wasn't raising her voice, wasn't resisting. And yet she was still being treated like a problem. Why? Back on the phone, her husband had gone silent for a moment after hearing what was happening. Then came his response, steady, measured, but with an edge. "Stay right there. I am handling it." Now the officer stood with crossed arms, throwing glances her way like he had already made up his mind. He had no idea that the man she had called wasn't just someone with power. He was the man who signs the checks, sets the rules, and knows every name at that airport. As the officer continued to question her, the woman stayed silent, phone still in hand, her husband still on the line. She didn't need to argue. She knew what was coming. Meanwhile, a few airline staff members had started to gather in the distance, confused by the growing scene. One of them, a gate agent, recognized the woman instantly. Her face shifted from curiosity to concern. She quickly whispered something into her radio and walked toward them. But before she could reach, the officer held out his hand, stopping her. "This is police business," he said, trying to sound official. The gate agent hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but nodded and backed off. All she could do now was wait. The woman noticed everything. She saw how people looked away, unsure whether to step in or stay silent. She saw the cameras filming, but no one actually speaking up. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about what always seems to happen when someone makes assumptions based on appearances. Back in the airport office, the husband was already making calls. Security, operations, legal. He knew this wasn't just about disrespect. It was about accountability. The officer was still acting like he had control, completely unaware of the chain reaction already in motion. And outside, the whispers were growing louder. Something was shifting. Within minutes, something changed in the air. A few uniformed airline employees rushed toward the scene. Not the usual gate crew, but higher-ups. One of them, a tall man in a dark suit, with a badge clipped to his belt, approached with purpose. He didn't say much, just glanced at the woman and gave a small nod. She gave a slight smile in return, like she knew this moment was coming. The officer, still puffed up with authority, stepped forward. "Sir, this woman's been uncooperative. I need to question her further before she boards." His voice was loud enough to make sure the small crowd still watching could hear. The man in the suit didn't respond right away. Instead, he turned to the woman and said, "Ma'am, are you all right?" That's when the officer's expression started to shift. Confusion, hesitation, but he still didn't back down. More people were watching now, phones still up. Conversations paused. Something big was clearly happening. The gate agent who had tried to help earlier stood in the background, eyes wide, waiting to see how this would unfold. Then came the voice over the airport's private radio system, calm, direct, and unmistakably in charge. "This is the airline owner. I'm on my way to that terminal. Do not let the officer leave." The officer froze. The words hung in the air, thick with tension. The officer's posture shifted, his confident stance faltering for the first time. He glanced at the man in the suit, who hadn't even flinched at the officer's accusations. The crowd around them seemed to hold its breath. What did that message mean? The officer's confusion deepened, but he was still determined to hold on to control. But just as the officer started to open his mouth, trying to defend his actions, a sharp voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem here, officer?" The new voice was firm, authoritative, and one the officer couldn't ignore. Out of nowhere, another figure appeared, this time an airport supervisor, a woman with the same no-nonsense attitude. She was holding a clipboard, but her eyes were fixed on the officer with such intensity that he immediately straightened up. "I heard there was an issue," she continued, her gaze never leaving the officer. "Is this how you handle situations, assuming someone is guilty without cause?" The officer shifted uncomfortably, realizing that he was now surrounded, not just by airline staff, but by the weight of the situation that had escalated beyond his control. Then the second plot twist came. The supervisor, without skipping a beat, turned to the gate agent who had earlier tried to intervene. "You were about to call the customer service hotline, weren't you?" she asked, a subtle challenge in her tone. The agent nodded, eyes wide. "Well," the supervisor said with a cold smile, "we've just had a call come in. There's been a mix-up. The woman you're questioning is not just any passenger." She paused for effect, letting the silence sink in. "She's the wife of the airline's owner." The officer's face drained of color. The officer stood frozen, his mind racing to process what had just been revealed. The woman's identity hit him like a tidal wave. He glanced around, seeing the weight of the moment shift entirely. The airport supervisor's words hung in the air, but it wasn't just the revelation of the woman's connection to the airline that caused the officer to falter. It was the realization that everyone around him, from the airline staff to the bystanders filming, was watching him, waiting for him to respond. But before he could say anything, the man in the suit, the airline's owner, walked into view, flanked by a couple of security personnel. He wasn't the kind of man to make a scene, but his presence alone spoke volumes. He didn't address the officer immediately, instead looking at his wife with quiet support. The woman nodded at him, her composure unbroken. "Officer," the airline owner began, his voice calm but laced with authority, "I don't think this situation needs any further explanation." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "But I do think we should discuss it, quietly, inside my office." The officer swallowed hard, glancing around, realizing he had lost any control over the situation. But just when it seemed like the tension might finally break, the unexpected twist came. The airline owner turned to his wife with a look of genuine concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. The woman smiled, but her next words caught everyone off guard. "I'm fine, but I think it's time someone else took a closer look at how things are handled around here. Maybe we should have a little chat with the police department about their procedures." It wasn't just about the officer anymore. It was about the bigger issue, the pattern of treatment she had endured time and again. And in that moment, the officer realized the true power of the woman he had underestimated. It wasn't just her connection to the airline. It was her resilience, her ability to stand firm in the face of injustice, and her quiet strength in making sure those who abused their power were held accountable. The officer's eyes flickered to the bystanders, to the cameras still rolling, capturing every moment of his fall from authority. The stakes had just been raised far higher than he ever imagined. And in the distance, the sirens of an incoming police squad car could already be heard, signaling the beginning of a much larger conversation. The officer stood there, rooted to the spot, as the reality of the situation sank in. The quiet power of the woman he had belittled, and the weight of the airline owner's support, left him with nothing more to say. He had no choice but to follow the group inside the airport office, where the conversation would no longer be about a simple misunderstanding. It would be about the abuse of authority, the consequences of prejudice, and how quickly the tides can turn when one person stands their ground. Meanwhile, the woman, her head held high, walked out of the terminal with her husband. The crowd, which had been tense just moments ago, began to disperse, the whispers of what had just happened turning into a deeper reflection on power, privilege, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As the couple made their way toward the exit, the cameras slowly turned off, and the officer's fate was sealed in a way he could never have imagined. In the end, the woman's call wasn't just about getting out of the airport. It was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply call for accountability. The message was clear. Actions have consequences, and no one, no matter how small or silent, should ever be underestimated.